The wine arrives first, then the food: roasted boar, honeyed dates, platters of oysters still glistening. You're seated 3 cushions from the Emperor of Rome. Your wife sits beside you. Your daughter, barely 16, adjusts her stola nervously across the table. The room fills with senators, generals, their families. Everyone who matters in the empire is here. And then Caligula stands. He doesn't toast. He doesn't announce anything. He walks, slowly, around the table, past the consuls, past the prefects, past men who command legions. He stops behind your daughter. His hand rests on her shoulder. He says 5 words to you, not to her. The room doesn't gasp. No one moves. Because everyone here has already learned what you're learning now. In this palace, objection is permission to die. So you do what every father in this room has done. You smile, you nod, you watch her leave with him. And when she returns an hour later, silent, pale, adjusting her dress, you pour more wine and pretend you saw nothing. Because Rome just taught you. The empire doesn't care what you saw. It cares what you're willing to forget. If this is the history they don't teach in schools, the documented truth they hoped you'd never find, then subscribe now. Because we keep uncovering these stories one by one, no sugarcoating, just the raw truth. What happened in these rooms didn't make it into most history books. But the records exist. If you're here because silence shouldn't erase documented history, then stay. We're going back inside. In 37 AD, when Gaius Julius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus took power, Rome didn't crown a stranger. They crowned a legacy. His father, Germanicus, had been the most beloved general in Roman history. Crowds wept at his funeral. Riots broke out when whispers spread that Tiberius had him poisoned. His mother, Agrippina the Elder, descended directly from Augustus. She'd accompanied Germanicus on campaigns, standing beside soldiers in Germania while pregnant. Their children represented everything Rome told itself it still was: discipline, nobility, military tradition, divine ancestry. When Tiberius finally died, the Senate didn't deliberate. They offered the purple to Gaius, nicknamed Caligula, little boots from the miniature legionary sandals he wore as a child among the troops. He was 24 years old. Rome erupted in celebration. Political prisoners were released. Gladiatorial games were funded. The granaries were opened. Taxes were reduced. Suetonius records that over 160,000 animals were sacrificed in the first 3 months of celebration alone. For 7 months, it felt like the dark years under Tiberius were over. Then Caligula collapsed, October 37 AD. The emperor fell into fever so severe that priests were dispatched to every temple in the city. Senators pledged their lives to the gods if he survived. One, Atanius Secundus, even vowed to fight as a gladiator if the emperor recovered. Philo of Alexandria records that the entire empire held its breath. Grain shipments stalled, markets closed, messengers rode day and night between Rome and the provinces, carrying updates. For days he lingered between consciousness and death. And when he woke, the records fracture here. Suetonius, Cassius Dio, Philo, Seneca, all of them note the change, but none explain it. Some claim brain fever, others suggested poisoning. Modern historians have speculated epilepsy, encephalitis, hyperthyroidism. But diagnosis doesn't matter. What matters is the man who opened his eyes was not the one who closed them. Within weeks, he declared himself a living god and demanded temples in his image. He forced senators to run alongside his chariot for miles in their togas. He ordered a floating bridge built across the Bay of Baiae, over 2 miles long, just so he could ride across it wearing Alexander the Great's breastplate. The construction consumed ships needed for grain transport. He revived the treason courts, the same courts that destroyed his family. And he began altering how the palace held banquets. At first, Rome interpreted these as eccentricities, youthful excess, the arrogance of sudden power. But within months, the pattern clarified. This wasn't instability, this was methodology. Banquets were not optional. Senators received word. The emperor requests your attendance. Bring your wife. Bring your daughters if they are of age. Refusal wasn't listed as an option, because refusal didn't need to be forbidden. Everyone remembered what happened to families who disrespected Tiberius. So they came. The palace dining halls stretched over 300 feet. Couches lined the walls, arranged by rank. Slaves moved between them with wine, fruit, delicacies imported from Egypt and Gaul. Caligula reclined at the head, and he watched. Not the food, not the entertainment. He watched the women. Ancient sources describe what became routine. He would study a senator's wife across the room, openly, while her husband sat 3 couches away. Sometimes he commented, loudly, comparing her to others, critiquing her appearance, praising features in language meant to humiliate the man, not flatter the woman. Sometimes he gestured, a servant approached, a quiet word. The woman stood because she had no choice and followed. The room continued eating. Conversation resumed. No one acknowledged what just happened, because acknowledging it meant choosing, object and vanish, or stay silent and survive. Rome chose survival, every single time. Suetonius writes plainly, he lived in habitual incest with all his sisters, and at large banquets, he placed each of them in turn below him, while his wife reclined above. But the sisters weren't the only targets. Seneca, writing decades later, describes how Caligula publicly evaluated the wife of a consul, Lollia Paulina, then removed her from the room. When she returned, the consul did not react. Cassius Dio records, he summoned the wives of men to the palace, as if to honor them. Then, after examining them as though they were slaves for sale, he took whichever one he pleased. Sometimes he sent for husbands as well, and forced them to witness. The phrase "as if to honor them" is key, because the summons came with pretense, a gift, a compliment, an imperial favor. Refusal was framed not as self-defense, but as insult to the emperor. An insult to the emperor carried one penalty. Dio continues, afterwards, he would return to the banquet and openly discuss what had occurred, offering praise or criticism while the husbands were present. This wasn't secrecy. This was exhibition. The palace kept records. Secretaries documented attendance. Names were logged. Who came, who brought whom, who left early, and why. Pliny the Elder mentions these records existed for decades, stored in the imperial archives until they were finally destroyed under the Flavian dynasty. But while they existed, they served a purpose. They turned every banquet into documentation. Attendance became complicity, and complicity became insurance for the emperor. Because men who had participated, who had watched, who had stayed silent, could not later claim ignorance. They were witnesses, and witnesses to imperial crimes became accomplices, which meant they could never testify. Some men were rewarded afterward, given land, titles, positions. Others were mocked, fined, exiled for failing to appreciate the honor. The randomness was structural. If punishment followed resistance, men could unite in refusal. But if punishment was arbitrary, if cooperation might bring reward or might bring nothing, then every man acted alone, isolated, silent. Survival became individual, and collective resistance became impossible. Seneca describes the calculation. Men who had once commanded armies now measured their words at dinner, fearing that even agreements might be interpreted as conspiracy. In 39 AD, after uncovering a plot led by Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Gaetulicus, Caligula didn't just execute the conspirators. He went after their families. Their wives were summoned to banquets. Their daughters were evaluated publicly. Then, weeks later, after humiliation had settled, the men were formally charged with treason. By then, resistance was already broken. The accusation was just documentation. But Caligula also promoted one of the conspirators' cousins, gave him a command in Germania. The message was clear. Loyalty to family could destroy you. Loyalty to the emperor could save you. Choose. Dio records that some senators, anticipating the pattern, sent their wives away to the countryside, claiming illness or family obligation. Caligula, responded by requiring proof, medical inspections, sworn testimony. If the women did not appear, the husbands were fined or stripped of rank for disrespecting imperial hospitality. One senator, name lost to history, tried a different approach. He brought his wife to the banquet, but seated her between two older matrons, hoping visibility would provide protection. Caligula noticed. He commended the senator publicly, praised his devotion, then summoned all three women. When they returned, the senator was assigned to inspect grain stores in Sardinia, a post that meant exile. His wife remained in Rome. The system was explicit: your family attends or your career ends. And once they attended, they belonged to the palace. But some women didn't wait to be summoned. Lollia Paulina, mentioned earlier, didn't resist when called. Her family had paid fortunes for imperial favor before. She understood the trade. Seneca notes she arrived wearing emeralds worth 40 million sesterces, not as protest, as advertisement, because in Caligula's palace, being chosen could be framed to the outside world as political success. Families began including these imperial audiences in marriage negotiations. A daughter who had attended the emperor's private chambers could be marketed as having imperial favor. The humiliation was rebranded, and Rome's elite were willing to rebrand it, because the alternative was admitting they had no power left at all. But violence alone doesn't explain compliance. Caligula understood that fear exhausts, that people adjust, that even terror becomes routine. So he alternated punishment with reward. After a senator's wife was publicly taken, the senator might be promoted. After a daughter was removed from a banquet, the father might receive